Welcome back, everybody. It's Tom Christie back in the decoy carving shop, and today we're going to start a new project to carve a blue phase snow goose. And I've never tackled a snow goose before, blue phase or white phase, so this will be a lot of fun. I spent a lot of time online looking at photographs for good profiles, and I've made my patterns accordingly and have everything sized. I went ahead and cut the bird out. If this is the first time you're visiting my channel, you can refer to other video series that I put together, like carving a drake mallard. That'll show you from beginning to end how to start with a block of wood, development of a pattern, how to bandsaw it out and get it to this point where we're ready to start the carving process. So I've got the head cut out, the body ready to go. This is going to be meant to be a gunning decoy, so it'll be more sturdy. It'll be less detail carving wise, less detail paint wise. And for strength, I'm going to use a hardwood dowel to attach the head to the body, so we can go through that. The bird will be hollowed out. I want it as light as possible because flotation will be key on this big guy. If you're enjoying my channel and getting value out of it, please hit the subscribe button. That helps me out. It's totally free, and I want to keep it that way. This is a resource for people that might want to carve decoys or wildfowl of any kind, and I hope it's helpful. All right, let's pull the camera in, take a look at some of the layout work, and I want to get this dowel hole drilled while we're still in the flat here. It's much easier than trying to drill it after all the shaping has been done. So we'll get that started. Welcome back. All right, I want to drill this guide hole for my 1/2 inch hardwood dowel. And so I've put a center point here, made sure that there's going to be clearance so I'm not drilling into the neck area, and there is enough wood there that I can center that. Another tip, I cut this out of a squared up block, so it makes a great nest to keep this surface level in both directions as I drill the guide hole. If you don't have the piece that you cut off for some reason, you can also hold it by hand. This just makes it a little easier. And I'm going to go about a couple of inches in. That gives me a nice tight fit. And now I'll do the same thing on the body. And since the body is in the flat, it's a nice level surface to drill that companion hole that matches up with this one. And to do that, I'm just going to pick the angle of my head right now and mark that out on here. And then I'll mark the center location to get my drill hole location. Got that marked out. And now we've got that set for future, and I can go ahead and carve and know that this is going to match up the way I want it to. All right, I've got that set so that we can have a nice flat mating surface here. And there's a little interference back here that I'll clear, but as we round the head, we'll be set. All right, just a quick overview of some of the layout work I've done to date. I've got a study bill, and I developed a pattern from the study bill. Used that to mark top and bottom. And since this is a gunning decoy, I'm going to be a little more liberal on the width for strength than the live bird. And then I've marked out where I need to cut back. And then I've got a dimension from the tip of the bill right to the front of the cheek, like I do on other birds, and I've marked that on here so that I can make a cut there, and I know that's the point where the cheek meets the bill. Same on this side for symmetry. And now I'm going to use my coping saw and go ahead and cut out the bill. This study bill is slightly smaller than the pattern that I put together. I wanted this bird to be on the large size, if anything. So I'll just adjust it's very close, but I'll just adjust a few dimensions accordingly to make sure I match up and get my proportions correct. I'll use my coping saw. And I'm staying a little outside of my lines because I want to have some room for carving and sanding the bill so that it doesn't end up too thin when it's all said and done. And what I'm doing is cutting down to this mark right here, and then I'm going to go in from the side, take this chunk of wood out. You may want to go at this faster than I do, but this bill size and shape is so critical. I'm also looking on the underside. That's why I pencil the pattern in on the underside to make sure I don't get my saw undercut or overcut down below. This flares out as it meets the face on this goose. Now I'm going to go in, follow this line. You can hear it, the sound as it approaches the other cut. And you want to go slow here because I don't want to gouge the side of the bill. I'll do that on this side, then we can cut these wedges off. Since this particular head has a nice flat and level surface, I'm going to use my bandsaw to make these wedge cuts from the edge of the bill back to a guideline I've penciled here. Same on this side, and then also these back cuts, guideline here. So I'll make those cuts now. And I've also penciled in underneath because I don't want to undercut the neck here. So I'll be watching that as I start to bandsaw to make sure I don't go too deep here. On the back. A little more layout work. I used my study bill and got some reference dimensions and marked those on the wood block, including how far this comes back towards the eye. I also marked out the width of the crown, and since I'm not that familiar with snow geese, I wanted to get a good shot from the front to have a good feel for the shape. You can see a nice round crown, definite cheeks, and then kind of angling down. So it doesn't doesn't return much here, and there's some heavy feathering in this area that we're going to want to leave wood to put a few of those feather groups carved in. Very characteristic of the bird right in this area. So I want to carve just a few of those groups in so that we can add some paint to it and really convey that difference between the light and dark in that area. So now we're ready to carve, and I just mentioned that because it always pays to check your reference if you're not familiar with a bird in particular.
Now we can start the carving, and I'm using, by the way, I'm at 2 times speed here, just so we can get through this a little quicker. I'm using this little 1/8 inch ruby cylinder to go in and define the notch and begin to pull material back on the side so that we can meet up with that side profile on the bill. So right now I'm just relieving material to create the notch, leave the notch area raised from the bill. So I have to take that down far enough that I can meet up with the side profile on the bill, which I've marked out there, as you can see. That gives me guidance on how deep to go as we define the notch here. Now I'm going to start working down the side and follow my pattern down the side to that front of the cheek cut that we've put in place, so that defines where the bill meets the cheek. Right now I'm just starting to rough things down, and then we'll take a look at dimensions. Now I want to take material off, and I've marked out the width of the crown, so I've got this 1/8 or 3/4 inch saber-tooth burr, fine tooth, and I'm going to follow my guidelines and narrow the crown and begin to form the cheek in back. Again, the video is at 2 times speed here. You want to go slower than this when you're actually carving. So I'm taking material out until I meet that width guideline. And I'm not trying to round the crown at this point. I want to get the width established and also get some eye location set before I start rounding things off on top. So now I'm pretty close to the guideline. I'm going to start to round, just rough round the bill. Make sure you leave your center line intact. Once I've hit that mark, then I can begin to round the cheek and soften that line, and also work to this neck guideline down below. So I'm going to start to take out material under the throat here. You need to go at this slow because this is in grain, so just don't try to dig in too hard. So I'm just removing material until I hit that neck guideline that I've given myself underneath, and rounding the face now back into the bill. And I'll do that on the other side as well. Okay, here's just a quick look from the front after both sides have been taken down and rounded. Now I want to go to my pattern and get this reference dimension from the tip of the bill to the top of the bill where it meets the face and reestablish that. I had that drawn on, but it's always a good idea to go back to your pattern and reestablish things as you start to remove wood. So I know exactly where that bill comes back towards the eye. Now I'm going to use that little 1/8 inch cylindrical ruby and define that line a little more than I have. This is actual speed, by the way, because this is kind of detailed work, so I just wanted to keep it. You can see I had to use a little Bondo there on the side of the bill because I did exactly what I told you not to do. My saw cut going in kind of cut into the bill a little bit, so I had to fill that area. So don't do what I did. So I'm going to work this for a while and establish these lines on both sides. I'll speed the video up here. I've also kind of rounded that notch area above the notch to begin to blend that into the head. Okay, now I want to establish the width, make sure my width of the bill, and you can see from the front, this bill really is concaved and then flares back out again as it goes to the edge of the upper mandible. So we need to take material out in this area. I've got a little flame-shaped burr, and I'm going to carefully create that concaved area and start to remove material. And I'm going to keep checking my reference to make sure I don't go too deep here, but it definitely pinches in below the nostril. And so we want to shape that up and then re-round the cheek into that area so we don't leave a ridge there. This is actual speed, by the way. Since I'm using a burr, I like to run those at actual speed. So I'm just going at this slowly and beginning to pinch that area in a bit so we get that characteristic shape from the front. Now I want to get a dimension from the tip of the bill to the corner where the upper and lower mandible meet and position that on my carving on both sides. And I'm going to want to check the vertical to make sure I get that dimension symmetrical from side to side. So I'm getting a dimension from the corner here down to the cheek or the throat below, and just really nailing that position of that corner from both sides. Now I'll just pencil that in. This comes back here, goes out to the cheek, and we're going to want to remove material back here in this area. So I'm just giving myself a guideline on both sides. So we're going to take that back into the face and maintain the width of the bill as it goes back into the cheek here. I'm going to use my little flame-shaped ruby or burr and just remove material from that area. So you can see I'm maintaining the width of the bill as it goes back into the face. We want that to be consistent and forming that little return where the corner of the upper and lower mandible meet. Now I'm removing material and just rounding that back into the bill. So do the same thing on this side. I've been, again, being very careful. Since this is a burr, it's going to cut material off quickly. So we just have to not use a lot of pressure, a light touch. There's quite a bit of material that I needed to take off here since the head of the goose is rather large. So I chose to use a burr here rather than a ruby bit on this particular decoy. Now I'm using that bit to round and begin to form the neck under the cheek there. This is all just rough carving, removing wood to sculpt the head. Okay, I'm going to speed the video up here so we can get through the rest of this a little more quickly. Just continuing to shape up that area and the neck down below on both sides, and make the neck rounded in that area. Now I'm going to stop and pencil in my work so far so that I can get a better look at the how things are shaping up, and especially from side to side to make sure I don't have one side different from the other. I'm going to recheck this dimension from the throat up to the corner there. And this is the reason I do that. It looks like I need to move that up just a hair on both sides. So I'm remarking that. I'll go back in and get that set the way it should be. Just have to take a little bit more out. And that should be good on that side. Same thing over here. Just peeling a little more material out of there so that when I go in to form the separation between the upper and lower mandibles, I can go to the proper location in that back corner. And now I'm going to my pattern, checking that dimension again, setting that location for the corner. And I've penciled in on both sides, very distinctive shape of the upper mandible with that curve up and down. And that's very important to portray the character of the bird. So I'm looking at my study bill, penciling that in on both sides. Give it that little smiley look. And now I'm going to take my knife and very carefully score a little bit of an upturn in the corner there. And then just do a shallow score along the upper mandible. And do that, take it a little deeper each time. I'm going to flip around here and dig in the corner. The view is not the greatest here, but I'm basically going to remove material from the lower mandible there. A little better view here. So doing the same thing here, scoring maybe a 1/16 of an inch. And taking that deeper and deeper with the knife until I meet up with the side profile scoring that I did with the knife, so that we can remove this material on the lower mandible. Okay, I've removed that width from the lower mandible with the knife, and I'll go in and clean that up with the ruby bit. A little bit of a pyramid shaped here. So I'm going to cut this back a little bit in the corner as the lower mandible goes farther than the upper back into the face, and then I'm rounding off the lower mandible there. This is a gunning decoy, so I'm not going to put a ton of detail in the bill, just a little separation here, maybe bump out the nostrils a bit, and that'll be it. So I'm using that to just remove any knife marks and make sure the depth is consistent in that lower mandible. And then cleaning up the corner here and shaping that as it goes into the face and lowering or rounding the lower mandible. And when I say rounding, I'm just taking the edge off a little bit. Now I'm fairing that into the face, so there's a nice transition there. And doing some rounding down here. Now we're going to do a little more definition around the lower mandible as it meets the face down here. there's a little offset here. So there's a little bit of a chin below the lower mandible line that I want to carve in here. From the side, you see a little bit of that chin going underneath the bill. And so I'm going to use my knife and very carefully score back in this direction to the center line underneath, and then take off that sliver and form kind of a V shape under the chin. You can see there's a little bit of a shadow cast there now. And now I'll use this triangular shaped bit, ruby bit, to go in and clean that up and form that V shape under the lower mandible and relieve some material going back in the face so that a little bit of a shadow gets cast from above in that area. I think it's very distinctive, at least on the reference that I've looked at. So I want to portray that in the bird and show that little bit of a chin under there, kind of like a canvas back drake sometimes gets that little pouch under the lower mandible. Just a detail, but I think it'll help convey. There you can see a little bit of a light cast on that area. Now I want to work on this area on the upper mandible, right along the lower edge of the upper mandible. There's quite a bit of a ridge there. And I'm just going to use this pyramid or bullet-shaped ruby bit and go in along that ridge. I'm using the rounded shape here so that I don't cut a deep trench in there. I just want to remove material up above that area and leave that area along the upper mandible a bit of a ridge. And then I'm ferring that into the upper mandible and just leaving that area high right along the lower edge of the upper mandible. Pretty distinctive on a snow goose. So I want to carve that in and just develop that shape. You can see a little bit of a shadow cast there from that ridge. And I'll clean this area up, remove wrinkles, keep taking material out, and see from the front we're starting to get that nice hourglass shape to the bill. Same thing here. So I'm going along that and then removing material above to help form that hourglass shape from the front, and then going back and smoothing that out. It's a pretty prominent ridge along that upper mandible. But again, I don't want a hard line, and that's why I'm using the rounded shape here. I want to keep everything nice and soft and rounded. There you can see that a little bit of a prominent ridge there. Now I'm going to do some work, a little bit of work to define the nail here. And again, I just want to create an indication, little bit of it. And so I'm going to use that bullet nose bit again and just dig in ever so slightly here to separate the main part of the bill from the nail there. There's not a hard line there on the study bill. It's just kind of a nice soft transition, but there's definitely a bump up on the nail. So we want to duplicate that here. We'll keep everything strong and sturdy, but still put a little bit of a detail in here so that when we paint this, that nail will be pretty prominent. It's a good size nail on the end of a snow goose's bill here. So So I'll get that shaped up and do some sanding as well. Now I want to create this little bump for the nostril. I'm not going to carve the nostrils in, but I want to have a little raised bump there that I can paint on the nostril hole. And again, keep things sturdy, but also have a little character to the bill. So I'm checking the study bill to see the size of that bump on each side and get that identified. And it narrows up at the top, so I'm going to want to pencil this in here and make sure on the top it's kind of narrowing up as they go towards the front. Now I'm going to use my little cylindrical ruby bit. And I say ruby a lot. It could be ruby or a diamond bit. I use them kind of interchangeably. But I'm going to follow that outline and cut a little trench on the perimeter of the bump here. And then we'll leave that area raised and we'll start removing some material around the bump. The bump, I'm sure, is not the right technical term. So I'm taking material off the top and the bottom, doing some shaping of the nostril enclosure itself, just to give it some roundness. This is kind of a back and forth procedure to shape things up, and I'll keep going back to my reference and making sure. I also like to pencil things in so that it makes them a little more visible. I just did some sanding to smooth those nostril bumps off. Now I want to put in some cheeks here. Just a little bit of a detail to cast a shadow on the side of the face. And we want these to be subtle. So I'm using the bullet-shaped ruby bit just to follow my guidelines and cut a bit of a trench there, and then I'll work back in both directions to blend that out and make a nice rounded shape. You may choose to not do this. I like it. I think it gives a little more character to the face, and is also accurate. So I'm just removing material from both sides because we don't want a harsh shadow cast here. I just want a very subtle shadow coming off those cheeks. Nice and soft. So I'll speed the video up here. Just continuing to work the roundness and make sure that that goes down into the neck the way it should. Just a view of that. You can see just a little bit of a subtle shadow there and some character to the face. Now I'll do considerable amount of sanding to soften everything up. And once that's been done, I use this 1/2-inch sanding drum, and I'm just going to use that to sand the entire head. Do a little more sculpting with the end of the drum there, as you can see, but basically use this to rough sand everything. This is, I think this is 100 This is either 220 or 150 grit, so relatively fine. Taking all the tool marks out, the grinding marks, and softening everything before we do some hand sanding to finish it off. So I won't show any more of this. I'm just basically going around the entire head and sanding the work that I've done so far, and then we can move on to the next step. Next step is I want to get the eyes set at the proper distance between them, and I've got a reference dimension from my pattern in those calipers. You can see the calipers won't slide all the way back to the eyes the way it is right now, so I'm going to use this bullet-shaped ruby bit to put a little bit of an eye channel in here, right through the middle of the eye, and that channel kind of goes right up to the front of the bill, or to where the bill meets the face. And I'm not going to have to go very deep on this snow goose to hit the proper width dimension. So you can see I'm using that bit to make sure things are rounded up and down away from that groove that I'm putting in place. We don't want any harsh shadows, just nice soft transition. I'm going to try that again. Closer, but I can go a little deeper. And that eye channel is the way the bird looks down towards its bill when it's feeding, so it needs a clear line of sight down in front. Now I'm just rounding that back into the cheek area and also up into the crown. And now I'm at the proper dimension. So once I get this dimension set, then I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of sanding to smooth things out. And then I'll go back and round the crown. I like to get this eye dimension set before I start rounding things off. It just helps me keep an eye on symmetry before I get things rounded up. I'm going to go with this 3/4 inch bullet nose or round nosed bit, cylindrical bit, and just start rounding. And we had looked at the reference from the front, and the crown is pretty well rounded. So a mistake a lot of new carvers make is they're afraid to take too much off here, and you end up with a very square-headed kind of Frankenstein look from the front. So make sure you check your reference, and on this particular bird, I mean, some birds do have less rounded crown from the front. This bird looks like it has a fairly well-rounded crown. So that's what I'm going to do. And then I'm just shaping that into the back. And again, I say this a lot, but make sure you don't grind away your center line, because that is your pattern, and we don't want to lose that nice profile that we took so long to develop in the pattern making. It's amazing how subtle a change can be that changes the look of the entire bird. Now I'm going to switch to these feather groups on the side here, and this is very characteristic of the snow goose. Really fairly deep groups of feathers that are grooved in between, and I'm going to use the edge of this burr and just go in and cut some quick trenches, I'll call them that, between those feather groups. And I've used my pencil and the pattern before this to kind of map out where I want to do that. you can see my sketches on the bird there. And we want these feathers to flow nicely, so we don't want them to be hard like picket fence. We want them to have some curvature as they go around and sweep towards the back of the head, even on the neck as they nestle into the breast. A little bit of curvature to put some artistry and realism. That is the way the feathers lie on the bird. And once I get those grooves cut, I'm going to spend some time removing material on the back of the head, so that these ridges become more prominent. So right now I'm just cutting the grooves in that side of the head, again following my penciled guidelines. I'm not trying to render every feather here. I'm just trying to create those very characteristic grooves. And then we can finish the job with the paint that we put on top of this later to really convey that this is a transitional area between the very light head and the dark neck and breast. So this is going to help us with that transition later too. Okay, I've got those grooves kind of cut in there. You can see they catch a little bit of a shadow from overhead light. And now I'm going to work on the back of the head and kind of take this area down a little bit. So again, not losing my pattern, but making sure the end of those feather groups are a little bit prominent. And same thing down here. I want to cast a little bit of a shadow under those feathers onto the neck. So I'm going to remove some material down here to help facilitate that. Same thing over here. So we want to leave that group of feathers on the side of the neck high. There you can see it's kind of rough at this point. But I'll switch to a ruby bit here, this kind of pyramid shaped bit, and go back and refine that work and remove the burrs tend to leave burr lines and scar the wood a little bit, so you need to go back and smooth that out with a ruby bit. So I'll jump ahead on this. This is kind of repetitive work. I'm just finishing up with the ruby bit here, and then I'm going to spend some time sanding everything to make sure everything is nice and smooth. And just get rid of all the tool marks and blend things in so that everything looks nice and soft. All right, I've got that shaped up pretty good. I'll do some more sanding on it, but we've got a little texture back there in that area. All right, I'll get the eyes located from the tip where the bill meets the face here, both sides. And then I used my circle template, and I lowered that a little bit from the center line there, just looking at my pattern and the way things worked out. I think that's the correct position. Now I'm going to use a little gouge and very carefully open up this eye hole. So I'll get that done and then come back and we'll install the eyes. I'm using Michael Braun 12 millimeter dark brown eyes, and I've got the one installed. Now we'll flip it over
If you've watched my other videos, you're familiar with this process, but I'll include it here. I've got my epoxy sculpt, 2-part epoxy mixed up, and I'm just gonna, I've got a little debris in the hole there. I want to get that out of the way so it doesn't end up in the epoxy sculpt. So I wet the eye hole, press the epoxy sculpt into the hole where it's flush, and then crowd the front where I have my measurement established. Push that eye in place. This is a big eye, so it'll take some force to get it in there. Epoxy sculpt is pretty stiff. Now I want a little forward cant and a little downward cant to the eye. I'm just looking from the front to make sure it's at the proper depth and that it matches up with the other eye. I can go a little more inboard with that eye. Okay. Then I'm going to take some epoxy sculpt and just put a little excess around the eye hole and kind of press that into place so it begins to bond with the wood. It's not a real elegant process, but it works well. And then once I get a little material around the eye, I'll wet my finger and start working that back and forth and smoothing it out into the surrounding wood so we don't have a visible line there between the putty and the wood. I've covered up the eye now, and that's okay. I'm just trying to get enough material in place and smoothed out that we can then open up the eye and be pretty close to where we want to be. You can use sculpting tools for this. I'm using a little brush that's been retired, and it's pretty stiff, but I can use it like a sculpting tool and just push this. I wet it first and then push this material around to open up the eye and create that almond shape. And then I'll use my finger and kind of pulling away from the eye, smooth everything out again. And this will take 2 or 3 times to get it the way I want it. So hopefully I've shown you enough of the process that you can do this. The epoxy sculpt is a water-based material, and Michael's eyes require a water-based material, just so you're aware, and he's got that on his website. Okay, I'll keep working this and make sure it matches up well with this eye over here. And then we'll be pretty much done with the head, except for some sanding. All right, I've got that eye set. The last step is a little clear water to clean off the eye and make sure you can see where the pupil's located. And looking from the front, I feel good about their position. Setting eyes is critical to conveying life in your decoy, in my opinion. So you want to spend some time and get this part of it right. So I'm going to set that aside, let it cure, and pick it up again tomorrow. All right, well, that's a good place to end session 1. We've got the head pretty well shaped up, and in session 2, We'll go after the body, get the body shaped up, hollowed out, and ready to put all the pieces together. Until next time, Tom Christie signing out. Good carving to you.